Okay, so just before I disappear, let me introduce our two guest presenters. We have Laura Falabella, who, yes, is a relative of our own Vivi. And in fact, it was through Vivi that we found her, and we're very thrilled and delighted. And her colleague is Alejandro. And so between the two of them, they're going to give us the presentation tonight. So Tony and I will now take ourselves off for now, and we'll let, first of all, I would like it if the two of you could give us a few words of introduction and so help us understand why you're actually here. But first of all, Tony is trying to say something. I can't hear you. You need to unmute. Okay, I'll do it. Tony, I can't hear you. You've muted yourself.
Okay.
There you are. Okay. Go. I'm not hearing Tony.
I'm not hearing either.
No.
Okay. I think maybe you can hear me now.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. For the millionth time, welcome everyone, and especially thank you to Helen for putting all of this together. And I just wanted to say there was such an interest, clearly all the people that are here tonight, and Helen figured that out and asked me, and we put it together, Helen especially. And anyone who wants to have a BAIN pop-up event, please tell me about the subject, and I can help you publicize it and help you with a couple of ideas. And I think it's a great idea now, especially when we can't be with each other physically, to be with each other in spirit. So just thanks to everybody in advance.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Okay. So are we ready to go? I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I am Laura or Laura. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain certain after-death arrangements that you can perform. My partner is Alejandro. We work together in family matters, especially in inheritance law. And what we will do, we are projecting some slides that we drafted so you can have some reading material for tonight. And this reading material is basically in connection to inheritance proceedings in Argentina. In most parts of the world, you can usually dispose of and freely dispose of your whole assets, your full estate. But in Argentina, you can also do this too, but you cannot dispose of it so freely as in other parts of the world. You have some certain limitations, and those limitations are regarding your forced heirs. Now, your forced heirs are the ones who limit your total disposal and your freedom to dispose of your assets. So having this in mind, let us begin by talking about who are your forced heirs and why do they limit your disposition or dispose of your assets. They are the descendants, your kids, they are your ascendants, your parents, and they are your spouse. Now, because Argentine rules has a very highly regulated procedure for forced heirs, it is that you have to take this especially into account to see whether or not you can dispose freely of your estate. Now, having this said, take into account that as the slide shows, forced heirs are those herederos legítimos. Those are the your descendants and spouses, and as I told you, your parents. Now, what happens? If you have kids, your descendants, then you may dispose only of 30% of your estate. Now, if you do not have descendants, you have ascendants, then you can only dispose of 50% of your estate. Always bear in mind that descendants kills ascendants. I mean, as ugly as this sounds. And then what happens if you have a spouse, then this spouse also is uh, brings you to that you can dispose of 50% of this estate. Now, how are you going to dispose of this estate? Well, now, and this is where your testament comes in, where your will comes in. I mean, you can dispose of 100% of your estate, you can dispose of 50% of your estate, or you can dispose of 30% of your estate. But to do this, to fully do this, you need to get in touch with a lawyer and a public notary. So together they will draft up your will. Now, this will, it's usually done with the public notary. Why? Because in inheritance proceedings, you won't have difficulties in getting it through. I mean, it will not be challenged. It won't be declared void. And you can ask me, hey, Laura, can I write down what my will, what I want my will to be? Yes, you can write it down. But then, of course, you will have, well, you not, but your relatives will have difficulties, and they will, this particular testament will be challenged in an inheritance proceedings. Now, um, on a will, you need to know what you can dispose of and who you will distribute it to, and also you can settle down who will be in charge of distributing such assets left by you. Now, you can tell me, what happens if I do not make a will? What happens if I don't make a will? Okay, don't worry. In Argentina, this is totally regulated. If you do not make a will, then if you have forced heirs, which were the descendants, the ascendants, and your spouse, they will receive the other part of your estate. So if your kids received only 70% of your estate, if you have no will, they will receive the remaining 30%. What happens if your parents are alive and they receive your estate? Well, okay, they will receive half and then the other half. And what happens with your spouse? She will receive it all. You know, spouses always receive a lot. But now, you can tell me, wait a minute, what if I have no heirs and I do not make a will? Well, then your brother and sister come up. You know, those are your collaterals: your brother, your sister, your aunts, your nephews, your nieces, your uncles. Those are the collaterals that the law makes them get in charge of your assets. And you can tell me, what would be the case if I have no heirs, forced heirs, I have no non-forced heirs, I have no will? What happens then? What happens to my assets? I mean, what happens to my estate? Okay, well then you can give it to the Rodriguez Larreta, you can give it to Kisilov. It depends on where it is located, of course. So, you know, actually what is important is to know that Argentina has a highly regulated inheritance law, but it's not fully regulated. It only regulates up to a portion of your estate. If you respect that portion, then of the other portion, you can freely make a will on. But if you do not respect it, well, then there is a problem. That's why we usually suggest you do it with a lawyer and a public notary so that this will not be challenged in a future inheritance proceedings. Ale, do you want to continue with what happens with your testament, or what happens with a will and its validity here in Argentina, applicable laws?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the first thing you should note is what law will apply in case of in case of death, of course, because it depends on which law you apply. It will determine whether you are so limited or not. Well, in accordance with Argentine law, the principle is that the law of the decedent's domicile, the last of the decedent will govern. So if your last domicile is here in Argentina, then it's clear that Argentine law will apply all of its regulations and limits. But if your domicile is not in Argentina, if your last domicile is not here, there is an exception that will also make applicable the Argentine law. It is in the case if that you have real estate here in Argentina. If you have real estate, then no matter the applicable law to the whole inheritance proceeding will be here in Argentina for the transmission of that real estate, the Argentine law will apply, and that will imply that every disposition violating the forced heirship rules will make it voidable or challengeable if that's the case.
So as to speak, I'm
is,
sorry, Ale, I'm interrupting. So what has to be clear is that if you have property in Argentina, then Argentine law will be applicable, no matter where you grant the will. If you have property located in Argentina, then Argentine law comes in.
Yes, that's it. And the jurisdiction is more or less the same rule. The domicile will determine the competent court, and also with the exception that the real estate will be always subject to Argentine jurisdiction if there is a real estate here. Well, then we get to how to determine that a will is valid. Well, the first thing we have just talked about is the forced heirship rules. Laura was pretty clear on that. If you make a will that does not comply with that regulations, then the forced heirs are entitled to challenge that will, so that it may be limited or modified so as to fit with the applicable reserved portion for the relevant heir. Then an important thing to know well, Laura talked about this, is what you can dispose of. If you have no forced heirs, then you can dispose of the whole the entire state. You have no limit. If you have forced heirs, then you have to see the case. Maybe you are free to dispose of 1/3 or half. And if you do not make any will and you have no forced heirs, then the not regular heirs will inherit. And if you have no heirs at all, then the provincial state will get the state.
Rodríguez Larreta. Okay. Yes.
Yes.
He will be happy.
Yes, of course. Well, a question that I think you posted was if you make a will in another country, will it be acknowledged? Yes, the testament will be valid for all of your estate. That is universal for at least for our law. It is clear that it will be enforceable all over the world, but on the condition that it will not be contrary to any public policy. And as we said, forced hairs protection is deemed of public order. Then another thing to look into is how to the validity of a testament. Well, you have to look to whether it fits in or whether it is valid under any of the three possible regimes you can look to in order to grant your testament. That may be the law of the place where you are granting your testament, or the law of the place where you are domiciled, or the law of the place nationality. Sorry, it has to be valid in either of the under either of those regimes, but you cannot make a mixture of different laws. Of course, it has to be fully valid under any of those laws. And another important thing is that you have to, well, it is not so relevant in practical terms, but legal capacity is determined on the basis of the testator's domicile. So if you grant testament here in Argentina, it will be considered valid or not, depending on Argentine laws. Well, now let's talk about donation with reservation of usufruct. Perhaps you may have heard about this because it is quite common here, or it was quite common. As a means to make succession planning. But since a couple of years ago, the Civil and Commercial Code was modified, and since then it is no longer advisable because it becomes subject to challenge in any case. So no one wants to make a donation if it will be subject to claims by third parties. And if you want to sell it, then you will find that no one wants to buy it because of this. So no one wants to make this any longer.
Because what you used to have was that you could donate your house, your apartment, whatever asset you had, and you would reserve the use of that apartment for you. So for instance, I have an apartment, I would donate it to my kids, and then and in the meantime, I would donate it fully to my kids, but at the meantime, while I was living, I would be living in it. And so that I would reserve for myself the use of the apartment. Now, when I would die, this, what happens? This would automatically go to each of my kids. Now, this,
Laura?
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not. Somebody has asked, what is usufruct?
Well, it is the use. It is actually it is the use of a property which is in your name, and you transfer it, you donate it to one of your relatives. You can, that's why the case was, if I have an apartment in my name and I transfer it, I donate it, not transfer, I donate it to one of my kids, to the three of my kids, then I can be in the usufruct proceedings, is that I can be allowed to use the apartment. They cannot take me out, and then when I die, this apartment goes directly to them. So I do not have to go through an inheritance proceedings. You know, I don't have to go to a court of law and start a succession procedure. So it was relatively very good, you know, in Argentina. It worked very well. But now it's not advisable. And why is this? Not because you can't do it, but because donations now can be challenged, which means that since you donated, it can be challenged. I mean, they can say, okay, you can't be the sole property owner of this apartment. So then you would have a difficulty, you know. It was convenient for the time, but as of 2015, it's not that advisable. Some people do it, but it's not that advisable. I mean, after you die, they can challenge it for the period of 5 years. I mean, since you die, 5 years gone through, they have the possibility to challenge it. So it's kind of difficulty. We don't recommend it. We actually now recommend that the inheritance procedure or the inheritance procedure go through the court of law, whereby if you have forced heirs, they will receive the property, and if you don't have forced heirs, well then, if you've made a will, they will receive it, you know. So that's practically what we tried. We put it in the slide so you will have like a knowledge of what it was. Ale?
Yes, yes. Then this is less common here in Argentina. We are talking about the sale with reservation of usufruct. We are talking about the same, but now we are talking about a sale. It would be the case that you reserve for yourself the use of your property, but you sell it for upon your death. Let's say that you will use it until the last of your days, and when you die, then the purchaser will get the whole property. Here it is not so used. In some other countries like France, for example, under the name of viager. Here, as I said, we don't use it much, but it is a valid means to enjoy your property and get money for it while you're living, and not leaving any asset, or at least the asset you are selling to your inheritors if you don't want to. I mean, we talked about the fourth heirship rules, and they were so strict that it told you not to leave your fourth heirs without any of your state, any portion of your state. But this would entitle you to dispose of your asset while you're living. You are free to do so, and well, you know, when you die, then your inheritors will not get this because you sold it. And you are able to collect some part of the price. Of course, the purchaser will never pay the 100% of the value, because he's calculating like the current value of the property for the future. He will not get the property when he buys it. Well, this is another possibility. Yes, we were asked about how to leave your apartment or any asset to a foundation, for example. Well, that you make a testament.
Well, yeah. But bear into account that when you make a testament and you make that will, you have to take full conscious of who, if you have heirs, if they are forced heirs, and if they are, well then what part of that apartment or your possessions you can dispose of. If not, the Argentine law takes care of, you know, of it by hard regulations on inheritance law, as we mentioned.
Well, another concern we were told that you have is that how to ensure that the relevant people will get notified upon your death. Well, the way to do this would be to appoint an albaceas or executor, last will executor.
Kind of like a trustee, kind of.
Yes, a kind of trustee. Anyone can act as albaceas. You will determine, if you want to appoint him, the power he will have to act, his duties, and well, anything you may deem relevant for him to fulfill your last will, you can decide it when you make a testament. That's the way to appoint him, and of course he or she will be liable for any breach to his duties. And you may appoint more than one because, well, perhaps you thought about someone and he is not, well, he's dead before you, and well, you may appoint as many as you may deem fit, and they will be acting in the order you determine.
Yes,
So this
it
is an
is.
important, yeah. Laura?
Sorry.
You
Yeah, I'm
were,
sorry. Yes. The important thing here is that when you're asking, how can I ensure the correct people are notified upon my death? Well, now this is, again, you have to do the paperwork, and you can do this by appointing an executor. You know, you appoint an executor, you do it by you do it with a public notary, and this executor has the power to fulfill and comply with all your testamentary dispositions. And what he does is he goes, once you die, he goes up with this testament, he goes up to the court and says, you know, hey, this person has died, and this is these are his dispositions, and I am the executor. I provide for the preservation of this estate. You know, because sometimes
yes.
weird things happen in between your death time or death time and the time you start your inheritance proceedings. So in order for this to not happen, sometimes most people, you know, appoint a last will executor, which would be an albaceas, and it is a condition which is settled in our code, in our civil code. So it's something that is very usually done in Argentina.
Yes. Well, another concern was whether you had to register the testament with your embassy. Well, that depends on the case. For us, the more important thing is to determine where the last will and testament will produce main effects. For example, if you have your assets here in Argentina and the people you want to inherit those assets will be in Argentina, and well, you don't have any particular concern that of what will happen in your home country, for example, then you don't need to do this registry. You don't need to register anything in your home country or in your embassy, with your embassy. But if you have, well, part of your concerns here and some others in your home country, well, you may register with any relevant embassy or registry you may consider relevant. And in case of death, well, the court hearing your inheritance proceeding will get the relevant information from the registries where this kind of wills are recorded. So it is useful here in Argentina. We have the registry is local, so if you live, you grant your testament here in Buenos Aires, then it will be recorded locally. If you then move to another province and well, the inheritance proceeding is brought in, for example, let's say Cordoba, then the court sitting in Cordoba will probably not get the information from the Cordoba registry, but if it's relevant, perhaps if you move, have it registered in Cordoba as well, for example. But here it is mandatory that the court will get information about any testament that the decedent may have granted in you course.
Yes, what is important here is uh, where you make the go back, Ale, please. Where you make the testament is where it will produce its main effects, as it's on the slide. You see, it says if most of your assets are located in your country, in your home country, well then perhaps you should make a consular testament with the embassy. Now, if most of your assets are here, then perhaps a testament, you know, an Argentine testament should be considered as the best way. It actually depends on the person and on a one basis, you know. We go to the next slide, Ale. Okay, we were asked on questions on what documents do we require to begin the inheritance process. These documents, of course, are for you to gather, but of course, for your relatives to bring to the court of law. And this is, you know, the death certificate, a marriage or birth certificate, a birth certificate in case of your kids, and also any deeds or titles to prove the existence of your estate or your assets. Now, all this documentation needs to be provided to the court. The costs of an inheritance proceeding, well, we divided it into fees and expenses, you know. Fees, usually there is a scale, a local, local regulations contemplate a scale between 6 to 20% of the estate for each transmission. But this is the legal rule for the court to award fees. And this is, of course, in absence of any contractual stipulation you might have between the parties who inherit and the person who is going to do the inheritance proceeding. Now, in wise to expenses, this cannot be negotiated because the expenses are in regards to the documentation that you must file with the courts. So here there is no contractual stipulation to be taken care of. In regards to a time frame, usually with Corporation of the Heirs, we managed to finish inheritance proceedings in about 6 months to 12 months, and it would be approved in the court of law. We were also requested information on is a living will a legal document in Argentina? This is an institute which is called Directivas Médicas Anticipadas. What actually happens here is that local law allows you to anticipate instructions or give directives to your health in regards to your health situation, and if you foresee potential incapacity of yourself. And these instructions, what they do is that they give like the command, if you wish, to the doctor in charge or to the person in charge to fulfill your instructions. They can, of course, you cannot here by law imply euthanasia because it's not valid, but of course there are other proceedings that you may impose to that person. You can do it either by a public, with a public notary, or you can do it just in a simple paper, but your signature should be certified, you know. That is important. So to take into account, and you may dispose and anticipate directives and instructions regarding your health, and of course, if you foresee a potential incapacity. Next slide, please.
Yes.
we were requested information about a funeral. How much does a funeral cost with burial, with cremation? Well, okay. Now, I'm going to Tony. I guess you want to talk about this too, but I want to like have this like very clear in our minds. This is kind of worldwide, guys, because we actually copy the proceeding of funeral not costs, but the proceedings of funerals, burials, caskets, and cremations. We copy it from the States. So it's basically and it's similar in most parts of the world. You have like two main frames. Well, one of them would be an urn and a cremation, and a casket and a burial. Of course, there is a huge variety, huge variety of costs between one and the other. It depends on the funeral home you choose, depends on the place you want to be buried. It can be the city cemetery, it could be a private cemetery. You can ask for a casket, you can ask for cremation, you can ask to be, there are so many varieties of things that you can do. But of course, we kind of, spoke to two funeral houses, and they told us they mostly vary. Of course, this with the inflation and everything changes, but we gave a range from $150 to $700 approximately, depending on what you choose. Tony, did you want to add a little bit here?
Actually, I was the one who was going to speak about this.
I'm sorry, got in the way.
That's okay. It's up to you. I've written some things down that I thought that I would just kind of roughly go through, and then I'll make the printed version of it available afterwards. But I could kind of just run through what I've been able to find out about the funeral side of things. Would you like me to do that now, or do you want me to wait till you've finished?
Why don't we write it? Why don't we do it now? So like the main idea gets,
Okay.
Finished, right?
All right. So let me just find it. Okay. So there's two groups of information here that I looked into. One of it is about funerals, and the other is I looked a little bit into healthcare because people were asking about that as well. It was very, very difficult to find information about funerals, and it's particularly about the costs, because as Laura said, it varies a lot from one funeral home to another. But this is what I was able to find out in general terms. First of all, when somebody dies, you need to report the death to a local doctor, who then certifies the death. And if the death has occurred in suspicious circumstances, or if the deceased is a stranger to you, it needs also to be reported to the police. The doctor issues a death certificate and a thing called an Informe Estadístico de Defunción, or an IED, which is really just used for statistical purposes, but it needs to be issued. So you need to register the death at the civil registry. And in order to do that, you have to have the following documentation: this IED certificate, and either a passport or a DNI of the deceased. You need to have an affidavit signed by a relative or a funeral home confirming the personal data of the deceased, along with proof. That includes date and place of birth, parents' names, birth certificates, marital status, death certificate, and the identification number of the person or the funeral home who's registering the death. So if you're registering a death for somebody else, your identification is also going to be required. The paperwork must be submitted and signed by the civil registry before you get permission to bury the body. There's no fee to register the death, but there is an administration fee to get the permit. So then in terms of disposal of the remains. So burial, funeral homes can usually guide you. And I think really, after reading all this, I think this is really the most important thing. The funeral home can guide you through the whole registration process, because they do this all the time. This is what they do. And they can also give you information about repatriation of remains, which I'll talk about in a minute. Cremation, you require permission from cremation, and it's generally given once the next of kin have submitted the death certificate and the IED to the civil registry officer. If the death has occurred through suicide or accident or even murder, God forbid, you require a warrant for cremation, but otherwise you will get it as soon as you register the materials at the civil registry. Deaths of foreign nationals must be reported to your local embassy. So this is, you know, it doesn't matter if you live here and this is your place where you're planning to stay the rest of your life. If you are a foreign national, your death must be reported to your local embassy, who may also be able to assist with repatriation. If the person who dies had insurance, then the cost of this will be covered, but understand that the costs have to be covered. So if there's no insurance or, you know, provision made for this, then the family and friends or somebody has to cover the transportation costs. So it's advisable to sort that out with somebody, whoever's your trusted person, before this happens.
Yes, but Tony, can I get in a little bit? Now, we can take into account that in most cases, after cremation has been allowed, this is a cheaper way to repatriate the remains, because then you would have it in an urn and you would go to a plane and you just travel. Now, if you are going to transfer the casket, now that is a little bit more complicated. You need a lot of more paperwork, and it costs a lot more.
Right, and I'm going to ask Cliff in a moment to talk about that for us. But just before I do that, as Laura said, euthanasia is illegal throughout Argentina, except in the province of Rio Negro, where a person with a terminal illness can refuse sustenance, surgical procedures, or artificial resuscitation, which is our understanding of a living will. So I was listening very carefully to that part, and I think that it's only here in Buenos Aires, or Buenos Aires province, you can't do this. You can't say, you know, switch off the machine. So I need to look a little further into what you would do about that. But it looks as though in North America, a living will is just a common thing, but here it's not. So if that's what you want, you're going to have to be careful about that. In terms of costs, as Laura said, it depends on what you want. I mean, this is the same any place. But in terms of the actual disposal, the least expensive is a cremation without a wake. And that costs approximately 25,000 pesos. For burials, you have to look at the rental of, you know, the plot in the ground. So in public cemeteries in Buenos Aires, including maintenance, the costs range from 400 to 2,000 pesos per month in public cemeteries. Plots in private cemeteries sell for a minimum of 55,000 pesos with monthly maintenance from, now I've got 50 pesos here, but I think that might be a typo. I think it might have been 500. But these are just the actual, like, this is just the very basic thing. The rest of it is just as it is in North America, depends entirely on each individual funeral home. So if you want flowers and you want a graveside ceremony and you want, you know, obviously caskets, and all those things are variables. And so the only people that can tell you about those are the individual
burial homes. Yeah.
And so I think it seems to me that the logical thing to do is to look at this before it's needed and sort of do your due diligence, look into maybe 3 different, obviously can't be doing this right now, but we could maybe do it by telephone. And just talk to these people and just find out what the costs are and the procedures, and then choose one. And you can in fact prepay the burial or the whatever it is you're going to do with a funeral home, you can prepay that. So that's an option. Or alternatively, knowing what it's going to cost, you can always put that money aside and make sure that whoever's looking after it has the money available to do it with. So that's all I was able to find out about funerals and so on. I can talk about healthcare in a moment, but before I do that, I want to invite Cliff to speak to the, now how do I do this? Let me just see. I need to go into manage participants and I need to find Cliff. Here's Cliff. So I've unmuted you, Cliff.
I've unmuted myself too, so can you hear me?
We can definitely hear you. So if you want to put yourself on camera again, you're welcome to do that, up to you. But we can hear you, so please carry on.
Start video, okay, there we go, I guess. Yeah, that's me, hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much, Helen, for organizing this. Thanks, Tony, for making it happen or allowing it to happen. And appreciate Laura and Alejandro for your contribution here so far. That was all very interesting. I have somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes of information to give. I'll try to zip through this because number one, it's not the most pleasant of all subjects, thinking about people dying and especially people close to you, but it's always helpful to know something ahead of time, or at least to have an idea as to what to expect. Let's start with just a couple of vocabulary words here. The human remains we call restos humanos, and the ataúde is the corpse of the body of the deceased. And if there's a cremation involved, then we're talking about cenizas, the ashes of the deceased. These can be shipped. I'm actually going to talk about two things. One is shipping of human remains or cenizas or to your origin country or the country of your choice. And the other thing I'll talk about will be shipping of inheritance. I won't go into a tremendous amount of detail. There's a lot of information that I think would be very tedious if I tried to relate it all, but let me give you kind of a general overview, okay? First of all, let me ask Helen, can you hear me okay? Am I coming through all right?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, sounds great. All right. Human remains can be shipped to the country of origin or the country of choice, but it is regulated and it can be expensive. Normally, shipment would be done by air, I would say probably in all cases. And a body or even the ashes would be considered as cargo, and it would be shipped as cargo and not as baggage. Ashes, technically, while it's probably frowned upon or even maybe a little bit illegal, I think it's common knowledge to many airlines that people do carry ashes on with them in their carry-on baggage. Technically, you should get a permit to do this, but you could probably get away with it if you don't. And especially if you don't bring the ashes in their entirety. When my father died, he was cremated, and I was surprised at the volume of ashes. It's actually, you know, at least 2 or 3 kilos of ashes, and I would assume that's pretty standard. But, you know, you might dispose of most of the ashes here and send just some small sample of those ashes to be distributed, for example, at a favorite place or at the home farm, or, you know, some favorite place of the person who passed away. They should not be shipped, though, or carried on in a metal container. It should be done in something organic, wooden or cardboard. You need to go, no matter what, through a funeral home or through a funerario to prepare a body for shipment, or to obviously go through the cremation. And they should actually be able to also provide you with the documentation that you will need for the destination of these ashes or of this body. You don't just put something on the plane and hope for the best. There has to be some arrangements made for when those remains arrive at the destination. The funeral home can also arrange for the transportation to the airport. The airport has a special location where this can be done. I can provide air freight. The funeral home can possibly do that as well, but if you need a comparative price or something like that, I can investigate what the air freight would be for the shipping of human remains. And what I know from past experience is that it's fairly expensive, you know, probably double what it would normally be for shipping some commercial goods or something like that of a similar volume and weight. So it's not inexpensive. I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but I'm trying to prepare you for the possibility of this ever happening. Documents, basic documents would be, of course, a death certificate, the cremation certificate. If you are the one shipping the body or the remains, then obviously your documentation would also be necessary. You should check with the embassy or the consulate of the destination country for any country requirements there as well. And if you're going to ship an actual body, not just the cremation ashes, the number of documents required increases quite a bit. Instead of 3 things, you need about 9 different things. And I won't go through and relate those to you, but I did give Helen a little printout that she might be able to forward to you if you request it, or I could do the same if you ask me. One very common, very popular funeral home here in Argentina is Velatorios Córdoba. I think there's several different branch offices around the city, but it's not located in Cordoba. It may be there as well, but it's just the name Córdoba, and they are qualified to help you with the shipping of human remains. Whenever I try to help a customer with something, some shipping needs, I always think about what I would do if it happened to me, or if I was the one who needed to do something. And in this case, it would be similar to what I just said. Nowadays, sending a corpse or a body back to the origin country, it's pretty impractical. And I understand that at times it's necessary. There might be family demands that require it, but if it were my choice, I would cremate and I would dispose of the vast majority of the ashes here and just bring a small sample of the ashes back to, like, say, for example, in the case of my father, when he passed away, we distributed the ashes in the little town in Florida where he, you know, spent his happiest years. And even though you're not supposed to do it, I think we swam out into the Gulf of Mexico and put some ashes out there too, you know, but you don't need an awful lot of ashes for that kind of thing. You can just use a small amount. And I think the point is made, and everybody comes away satisfied with that. Let me just switch now to inheritance. And the most important thing that I can say about shipping inheritances is be careful. You need to meet a lot of requirements, and some of them you might think would be obvious, but they're not. For example, you have to be able to show that these goods belonged to the deceased and only to the deceased. You also have to show that the goods now have been willed to you. So you have to prove that it was the intention of the deceased to give those things to you or to someone. So that is where the will comes in as being extremely important. So a very, very specific will that says, I wish to give this item or these items to this person. You have to be very, very specific and detailed about what that item is. And you have to be very specific and detailed about who that person is. Because if you don't, you're going to be spending months and months and months trying to get the customs, the Argentine customs, who work fairly slowly anyway, to get them to agree to allowing you to ship these goods. First of all, to take the goods into your possession and then to ship them. Shipping is always more expensive than most people think. We always try to give you the best deal possible, but it's not easy. If it were easy or if it were inexpensive, more people would be doing it. So just think of it in those terms. Again, just to go back to the point I tried to make originally, was a very, very detailed will is going to help make sure that your wishes are carried out when your life comes to an end. That's it from me. Thank you very much, Helen. Appreciate it. You're back.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, Cliff. I appreciate it. That was very helpful. And the printed materials that you have, if you could send them to me, and I'll make sure that everything in my report and everything is going to go to Tony. And eventually all this stuff, including the recording of tonight's session, will find its way onto the BAIN website so that people will have access to it. So if anybody has any questions about this, can I call on you to answer them as they come up?
Yes, of course. And when you're ready, I have a question also for Laura or for Alejandro. So
Okay,
whenever.
Could you put it just in the chat box, please?
Sure,
Cliff?
I can do that.
There's a lot of questions, and I think that's the best way to deal with it.
All
so
right.
I'll put you on mute, and you can take yourself off camera, and we're good. Okay, Laura, back to you.
Okay, well, I think we pretty much covered the whole information. Well, the final instructions were the last matter that we needed to talk about. It was what, in the event of an emergency requiring long-term hospitalization, can I repatriate the person to the U.S.? Well, yes, of course, this is possible. It depends on the medical condition of the patient in this case, and of course the cost, and of course if the hospital is willing to under their responsibility to authorize this hospitalization in another country. It can be done. Not that easy to do, not that easy to do. We talked about, how do I leave instructions for my cremation? I think you talked about this, Tony. You can leave instructions, of course, to any capable person, and that person has to can dispose of any means and circumstances and instructions for this to happen. I mean, you can. This would be, of course, again, maybe an instruction that you can do it by in a public with a public notary, and so it's like a power of attorney, giving this person the instructions that he needs to follow on through. Of course, then, if no instructions have been carried on, the cremation, the wake, the funeral, and the burial, if any, will be done by the relatives who are next in kin. And can I prepay for cremation? Of course, you said it. Yes, you can. And this, well, this we talked about, of speaking to burial burial homes, and they will take care of it. And it is, as you mentioned, Tony, they usually take care of everything. It's actually like a combination between the hospital and the cremation, the burial home that you choose. They start, you know, requesting information and documentation, and they just glide on through and make it happen. It's not something you literally take care of beforehand, although you may, but it's something that they make it happen. You just have to choose and pay in most cases. I don't know, Ale, if you wanted to add anything else.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Tony, we're available for any questions that you might have.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I just have a few more things about hospital healthcare situation, which is not the same, but people are interested as well. So I'm going to go back to my little report here and just, it's very high level, but I will provide this information to Tony so that everybody can get it. But basically, in terms of healthcare, there are two types of healthcare and hospitals, medical facilities in Argentina. There's the government-funded public health services, and then there's the private system. So public hospitals are free of charge for both nationals and foreigners. The only thing that's required is a patient's identification. And so that means, you know, if you're Argentine or if you have a DNI, that's obviously the best thing always is to have a DNI. But if you don't have that and you're a foreign national, you're going to need, you know, somebody's going to have a passport. Or a passport is the best to identify you, to make sure that that's clear. The only charges for anybody in the public system is prescription charges for outpatients. So while you're in the hospital, any drugs that you have while you're in the public hospital are also free. You don't pay for that. But when you're discharged, if you have to have medication, then you pay for that at the pharmacy. No special registration is required to benefit from government-funded health services. However, long waiting lists for medical care mean that many people choose to take out private health insurance. So that is the drawback to the public system. Everything is available in the public system, but it can take a long time. There can be long waiting lists. If you're taken to hospital by ambulance and you want to go to a public hospital, you need to tell them where you want to go. And I've just written 3 down here that I found in the public system. The one is called Hospital Garhan, which is on Viamonte. Then there's Fernandez, which is on Cervino, and there's Rivadavia, which is on Las Heras. There are many more, and again, it's a good idea to do your due diligence and look at these in advance. Then there's the private system. Private hospitals charge fees for their services, and most patients who use them have private medical insurance to cover them. These insurance costs vary according to age and needs, and generally they do not cover pre-existing conditions. So if you go to one of the private hospitals, if you go looking for private health insurance to help you be served in these private hospitals and you have a pre-existing condition, it's probably going to be denied. It's also possible, and I found this out myself, you can inquire in advance about the costs of various services at these hospitals. So, and it might be a good idea to do this before you need them. So, you know, if you have to have surgery, if you've been told that you have to have a certain type of surgery, you can actually shop around. You can go to the hospitals and find out what they would all cost for each one. And you may decide that you're going to do it anyway, even if you don't have insurance. But it's all about asking. So the 3 main ones that are well known are the Hospital Italiano, Hospital Alemán, and Hospital Británico. As a foreign national, this is useful. As a foreign national, you might be able to get information and assistance from your embassy. And it's a good idea to look at their websites. And while I was doing my Google searches, it just popped up the information on the US embassy site, and it's very, very useful. There's a lot of information on there, obviously for American nationals, but some of it would be useful for anybody who's looking into it. If you have to go to hospital in Buenos Aires, it is essential that you have an advocate to help you, especially if you're unable to speak for yourselves. So talk to your friends about this in advance and try to arrange it so that you can make this person aware of how you want to be handled, how you want your death to be handled if you die in hospital. So it's essential that you have somebody primed before any of this happens so that they know what to do in the event of your death. And obviously the best time to think about these arrangements is before you need them. So that is what I was able to find out. Where have our guests gone? Are you still with us, Laura and Alejandro?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
all right.
yes.
So I want to do, and just so that this doesn't get forgotten about, I'm going to put this up, but it's up on the screen now. And I was going to ask, how do we get in touch with Laura or Alejandro to find out more about this, or if you want to actually arrange for wills and all these things we've talked about. These people are experts in the field. And so here we have their email addresses and their telephone numbers. If you've got questions, they've said that you're welcome to contact them to ask your questions. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for everything tonight and for giving this information to us. So before we wrap up, I would like to now entertain the questions, and there's a lot of them. So I think the best way for me to do this is really just for me to read them from the chat. It's probably better than trying to have everybody unmuted and unaudioed and all the rest of it. So the first question was, what is usufruct? And I think we've had that one answered.
Yes, it's the use of the possessions that you have.
Right. So the next question is from Philip, and he says, if we have wills in both England and Spain, will these be upheld if we die in Argentina?
Yes, well, the principle is that the last testament will prevail. I don't know if they are compatible. They will both be upheld, provided that they do not violate our fourth fairship rules.
Right. Okay, and I think you actually talked about that.
I mean, what you have to take into account is that, that if you granted more than one testament, the last one will supersede the previous one. But if it is not compatible, if it is compatible, then both will be upheld.
Mm-hmm. So it would be important, therefore, to have, for whoever's taking care of things afterwards, to have copies of these foreign wills, as well as any will that you have in Argentina.
Yes, paperwork is elementary here. It's very important.
Trámites, yeah, we all know.
Yeah, trámites, exactly. You have to have a box with them, yeah.
So Lola has asked, do we need to have our last will and testament and other pertinent documents translated by special translators from English to Spanish?
Yes, not now exactly.
Not now, no.
No, when your heirs bring the inheritance proceeding, the court will request that you
translate those documents.
With the translation by a public translator, but by a chartered translator. But you don't have to take care of that right now.
Now.
I mean, that's something that you can handle in your course.
So it's part of the process around the death then, the translation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. This question is from Jim, and he says, my domicile and will and assets are in the US. My only asset in Argentina is my apartment. Does Argentine law apply to all my assets or only to my Argentine apartment?
Sorry, I did not get the whole question because it was like noise in the, I did not get it. Sorry.
So Jim says his domicile is in the US and his will is assets. Okay?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Well, the answer to this would be that transmission of his apartment would be ruled by Argentine law. And
Argentine law.
yeah, but if some, or if the Argentine court would deem that there was a violation of Argentine public order rules, then it would be possible that the court, for example, would compensate something that was provided otherwise in another country, in the US, for example, in this case. Let's say that the testator has some children, and he wishes to leave all of his assets to someone else, not his children. And he has an apartment here. Well, the local court would give that apartment to his children. And if it would not suffice, in that case, well, it would not have any other asset to compensate. But if in value of the whole apartment, it would be in a position to compensate whatever has occurred in any other place of the world.
So just for my own clarification, so in this case, the Argentine jurisdiction would take care of the apartment and, as you say, distribute it to these forced heirs. But
Yes.
other assets that Jim has in the United States would be beyond the jurisdiction of the Argentine courts. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right. I think that's what he wanted to know. Okay, another question from Lola, and I think we've kind of had this semi-answered. May I pass my ashes on to my kids to take back to the US in an urn?
Yes, you may.
Okay. I think that Cliff addressed this, that you're not technically supposed to do it, but it's understood that people do. So I know you're a lawyer, Laura. I'm not going to force you to say something that's
No, but in some cases with the cremation, you have like the not an authorization, but I mean, if you're going back to your home country, sometimes they will, not authorize it, but they'll, the person that I mean, the immigrant law director will just pass on through, have like no problem with it. I've seen it, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there are two questions here from Ruth.
Yes.
And she says, in the event of an usufruct.
Yes.
The first thing, and this is fairly complicated, if a person who died in 2017 donated his apartment in equal parts to his 4 children, reserving 50% of the usufruct for himself and 50% to his wife, stipulating that upon his death, the other 50% would go to the wife or the widow so that she can live there until she dies. Then the apartment would go to the 4 co-holding children of the now deceased donator. The donation was made in 2011. So under those circumstances, can any of this be challenged?
Sorry, perhaps I lost some detail, but
Do you want me to
the important thing, the donation was made in 2011. That is under the previous code.
The previous code, yeah.
Yes, that would be valid and not subject to challenge in general terms. As I got, I believe that it was to his children, wasn't it?
Yes, it was to his
Right?
children.
Yeah.
Those for the forced heirs.
So
Yeah.
it would not be challenged.
Okay, so it's not subject to challenge then. And the date of 2011, the fact that it was the previous code, it still won't be challenged. Okay.
I think so. Perhaps I got lost in the detail, but mostly I believe that's the general rule, so it would not be subject to challenge.
Okay. All right, here's a question from Jeffrey who says, How long must a person live in Argentina for Argentine law to override home country law if you only live in Argentina a few months per year?
No, but Argentine.
Yeah.
Nah, bueno, Ale, go.
Well, for Argentine law, what is relevant here is the domicile, and for us, domicile is determined on the basis of your will. If your will is to live here, if your place where you really determine the center of your business and your living is here in Argentina, then that's the domicile. It's not a matter of how long you are here and how long you are overseas or whatever. I can live here and I have to travel a lot and I still live here. So that's my will, that's my decision. It depends on the case, but more importantly, that if he really comes here a couple of months a year, that's not enough for us to consider it domicile if he doesn't want to.
Okay. All right. So the home country, your home country law, your home country will is going to be the thing that's followed under those circumstances. And by the way, if any of these questions have not been fully answered, feel free to add another question, a supplementary question at the end, and we'll get to it.
Yes, perhaps what I don't remember the name. What he asked was related to some tax matter because fiscal residence is dependent on how many days you stay here or in any other place of the world. So that if you stay more than half of the year in one place, that's your domicile, your tax domicile or residence. But for the purpose of this succession doesn't depend on the amount of days you stay in one place or another.
Okay, now this is, Jeffrey's asked for clarification, and I think we've addressed this. If you have a will in another country like the US, is it still valid? And I think you explained it. Yeah, it's still valid as long as it doesn't fly against Argentine law for Argentine wills. Am I right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Cliff asks, Laura and Ali said that if you have Argentine real estate in your estate, then the distribution of assets is controlled in Argentina by Argentine law. Does this mean for all assets or only for the Argentine real estate?
For the Argentine real estate.
Okay. All right, that's very clear. Jeffrey, does this depend on whether you won property in Argentina? If your property is all in the US, I don't understand this question, Jeffrey. Does it depend on whether you won property in Argentina if your property is all in the US or another country? Laura, do you understand the question?
No, I'm sorry. No.
Jeffrey, maybe you could clarify that in another question. Okay, this is from Stan. Oh, well, he's asking how does he contact Laura or Alejandro? And we've already said that, but what we'll do is at the end, we'll ask you to repeat the information. My only asset is my apartment. I have no forced heirs. My will is in the US. What do I do to dispose of my property with lease problems here and in the US? My lawyers in the US do not know how to list my property here or liquidate it.
I'm not hearing anything.
So can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I'm having difficulty.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So his only asset is his apartment, and he has no forced heirs, and his will is in the United States. He has his will is in the United States. How does he dispose of the property here and in the US, because the lawyers in the US don't know how to list the property here or liquidate it.
I can't hear anything.
I don't think I get. So he has an apartment here in Argentina, and he made a will in the States. Is that right?
That's what it looks like. His only asset is his apartment. He has no forced sale, and his will is in the United States. Yes.
Okay. Well, if he does not have any forced heir, he's free to dispose of his estate freely. So that testament would be acknowledged here. It just the heir or the beneficiary of that last will disposition would have to file for a inheritance in a testamentary proceeding here in Argentina. If the real estate is located here, it would be an Argentine proceeding, but the testament would be acknowledged.
Okay. So they just have to arrange for somebody down here to take care of the actual process of selling the property.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, didn't hear half of it. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Laura.
Had technical difficulties.
I think
There,
you're going to get some phone calls from following up on these questions, I think. Jeffrey says, am I correct in understanding that I must give 30% to my kid who lives in the US and is a US citizen? So in other words, is this child a forced heir under Argentine law if he's in the US?
Yes, well, if you have forced heirs in Argentina, even though they live abroad, they are forced heirs, and you can in the whole estate you can only dispose off 30%. The other 70% are to be divided upon your forced heirs, even though they are in the US or they can be in India, but they are forced heirs to Argentine law.
Right. So, but what if their will, their testament was in the US and they have no testament here in Argentina? Would that still apply?
And they have like no estate here in Argentina?
No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't
Because
say that.
the only way for that will to be set forth in the States, you don't have anything here, that's okay. I mean, the kids will I mean, the will be acknowledged, of course, in the States where it has been granted, and that's it. But if you have some property here, then Argentine laws are have to get in, you know, start regulating on forced heirs.
Mm-hmm.
If you have forced heirs and you have no possessions here, then your will is free to go, you know.
Right. Okay. Tony asks, what does domicile mean?
It's your address.
Yeah, it's your official where you live.
Official address, exactly, your address.
Okay. Howard asks, I have a will in New York, which I would like to change to add some friends in Buenos Aires. I could add a codicil to this will, but will it apply to Argentine law?
You have a will in New York, and you have she has a will in New York, and you want to add some people here in Buenos Aires. Okay.
As beneficiaries, yeah.
And as
beneficiaries. As beneficiaries.
As beneficiaries, yes. Okay. And do you have forced heirs?
Doesn't say that.
Okay.
So she would need to grant another or
another
supplementary testament appoint beneficiary. That's if that's the case, she can do that here or whatever.
This is Howard. I added I added a third question that says in reference to my first question. So if you can read that, and then I'll unmute.
Okay, well, all right, there's another question that comes before that. Oh, okay, this has been answered. The next question is from Ruth, and it's about the donation of the apartment, and Yusuf wrote be challenged if it was made in 2011. And we've already had an answer to that, which is no, it will not be challenged.
No.
So now we come to Howard's other question, which is, and I think we've answered this as well, are there any living wills in Argentina to state how I would like to determine do not resuscitate decisions in case I'm incapacitated in a hospital? And I think you answered that.
Yeah, well, we talked about living wills, you know, granting these instructions and directives to a person, to any person related to you, or to a friend, or to even the doctor, you know, your doctor, the doctor you usually see. But in Buenos Aires, you cannot you cannot ask for euthanasia. So this is like kind of a new regulation, and it's under a new law, but you can give last living instructions.
Okay, so it's kind of a gray area at the moment, I think.
It is, because I mean, there's no euthanasia in Buenos Aires. So they will make every effort to resuscitate you. You know, I think it's the word. I mean, they will make every effort to keep you living. And there's like there is no, you cannot ask them to switch off. The switch off is not available here because there's no euthanasia.
Right, okay. All right, thank you. Here's a message from Stan, who says, a friend died here. To ship her ashes were to be $2,500 on American Airlines. The funeral agreed to carry on the ashes and deliver to the family in the US for a cost. And they took the ashes as carry-on without having the family doing it. The cost was $5,000 US. This was 6 weeks ago, and it's for information. So the funeral home can actually help carry the remains back. They were sealed in a very nice wood box, and these costs were for transport. So once again, talk to the funeral homes, because obviously the different ones may have different ideas about what they're willing to do. But there you go, $2,500 on American Airlines, but somebody from the funeral service was able to do it for $5,000 US. Here's a message from Lola. If I give my flat to my kids, can they then sell it and get money out of Argentina with no problem? Or will they have to pay lots of taxes on it? How can we avoid all that and simplify the process for them?
Well, the process used to be simplified with the donation, but now, yes, you will have to give your apartment to your kids, and this has, you know, a fee, a very high fee, and there are some taxes involved. There's like no, I don't see, Ale, if you see another way of doing it to avoid paying taxes and going sending the money abroad.
No, I don't see a way to avoid it, but it's not so expensive, perhaps. I don't know your idea of expensive, but it's perhaps in the States you have a like inheritance tax or something like that. And here in the city of Buenos Aires, for example, we don't have inheritance tax. In the province, yes, but here in the city, we don't have that. So the cost is, well, it's relevant, but it's not so expensive. So as to contemplate the alternative would be that you donate it and you make it subject to challenges for at least 5 years. That's why we do not advise that you make a donation. For example, that would be the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then the other fee to take into account was what we had said about the inheritance law procedure, which was a fee of, 6 to 20% of the estate. That is the only fee if the possession or the flat is in the city of Buenos Aires. As Alejandro mentioned, if it is in another jurisdiction, sometimes it is subject to tax law.
Okay. Here's a question from Walcott, and he says, are household goods such as furniture, etc., counted as assets and handled the same as a house?
Yes, they are. They're part of of your possessions, and they're called in to the inheritance law
But
and the
if there
inheritance
is no
procedure.
conflict, sorry, if there is no conflict, no one would be making an inventory of that. Actually, you just dispose of that, and you do not tell any court about that unless you are really in need of disclosing that. Otherwise, you wouldn't do that.
They use. Oh, I mean the procedure would be, it usually goes to the inheritance procedure, but in most cases, forced heirs or non-forced heirs, they dispose of this material before submitting it to inheritance law.
Okay, and then Lola, a follow-up, she's the same one who asked about giving the apartment to her children. She says, may I give them 100% of my estate?
Yes, you may. You may give 100% of your estate. You are in the principle, the main idea is that if you have kids, you can only dispose of 30%. If you do not wish to dispose of that 30%, well then you can give your kids, if you do not have a spouse, you can give your kids the 100% of your assets or your estate.
Okay, and this is from the same person. She says, these kids, they live in the US. I have no will in the US. All of my estates and domicile are in Argentina. The kids live in the US. I have no assets in the US. So do I need to file a US will?
No, you've done it here, and well, I mean,
No.
you don't need to file in a will. You can, I mean, once the death occurs, then your kids need to come in to Argentina and file for the in succession proceeding here in Argentina in regards to your possessions.
Yes, just a comment on that. You don't really have to come to Argentina. You just can
Grant a power of attorney.
appoint an attorney. Yeah, so it can make it would be made at the distance, and it would not be complex for her children
Sí,
living abroad.
Okay, we have a few more, but we're getting to the end. So Howard, this is his supplementary question. In reference to my first question, my only relatives are a sister, a few cousins, and 2 nephews. Is it correct they are all non-forced heirs? Therefore, I could leave my Argentine apartment to anyone I want.
Yes.
Yes, you can leave your Argentine apartment to anyone you want if you do your paperwork, which is you do a testament. You make a will. Yeah. If you do not do that, then there is no will, there is no forced heirs, they will go to your collaterals.
Okay. Yeah, Lola, this is a clarification. Your sons are your forced heirs. Yes, that's.
Yes, they are. Your descendants, your ascendants, and your spouse.
Jeffrey asks, is a stepchild a forced heir?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
All right. Lola says, maybe go home to die in a hospice, to go home or to a hospice to die, rather than doing so in hospital if possible. to avoid DNI problems. I'm not sure whether, oh no, it's not DNI, it's DNR, do not resuscitate. So what she's saying, I think, is, can she, to avoid this business about not being able to resuscitate, can she go home to die or to a hospice to die to avoid the do not resuscitate ruling, or is that going to apply anyway?
It's going to apply anyway.
Mm-hmm. It's the law, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Ruth says, if you own an apartment in the city of Buenos Aires, can you donate it to your 3 children in equal parts?
Yes, it will. Well, yes, of course, you can donate it in equal parts. Yes, no problem with that.
Okay. Oh, that's the last one. All right. So I think everybody, if you've had plenty of chance to put your questions in, if you have any last minute ones, please feel free to do that while we're wrapping up here. So Laura, Alejandro, thank you so much for this. There's a lot of information here. And I think that you said that you would make the slides available to us as well, so that we can, you know, go, because there was a lot of information there, and I, for one, would like to spend some time actually
Reading it. Yeah.
on the slides. So that would be great if you could send a copy of those slides to me or to Tony, and we'll make sure that everybody gets them. And could you please, once again, give us your email addresses. Do you want to share your screen again and put it up, or do you just want to tell?
Yes, let me do that.
And then again, it's in the slides, and once you receive it, you'll have it there also.
Okay, there they are.
There you are.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sure you're going to get lots of inquiries, and I do appreciate we all do appreciate all this information, because we really, the reason we're doing this is that all of us, most of us, realized that we really didn't have a clue what we were supposed to do in the event of our death or somebody close to us. So this has given us a lot to think about, and a lot of information to deal with things properly. So once again, thank you very much. And
you're welcome.
Thank you to everybody for coming. Okay.
Thank you for inviting us.
Okay, it was our pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.